So the discriminant. Discriminant is a very important part of the quadratic formula because it tells us a lot of things, and not just with the quadratic formula, but it tells us stuff about the graph as well. So first of all, what is the discriminant? The discriminant is the square root part of the quadratic formula. So b squared minus 4ac. And we know that in the quadratic formula, since it's a square root part, we can't square root negative. So in order for us to be able to solve the quadratic formula, this has to be positive. So this also tells us something about the graphs. Okay, so if we have a discriminant that's negative, it tells us something about what the graph's going to look like. So remember that if we can't solve for the zeros, if we can't solve the quadratic formula, that means it must have a parabola that doesn't cross the x-axis. So when we have a b squared minus 4ac, we should know what that looks like on a graph. Okay, so that is when that's less than 0, or when it's negative, we're going to have parabolas that are one of two types. Either they don't touch the x-axis, that are facing up like this, okay, or they are upside down parabolas that don't touch the x-axis that look like this. Okay, so we know that this has no solution, so our parabolas can't cross the x-axis. Well, what does it mean when we have b squared minus 4ac equal to 0? Well, when it's equal to 0, we only have one solution. If it's equal to 0, basically that term is going to move the parabola so that it's just going to touch the x-axis. So it's either going to touch the x-axis, just bounce like that, and just touch at one point, or it's going to be upside down and just touch at one point like that. Okay, so that's how we're going to get one solution. And notice as b squared goes from negative to positive, it's just basically moving the parabola to touch the axes. And if it's greater than 0, which I'll do in a different color here, let's choose one more color, let's go with purple. So if b squared minus 4ac, let's get rid of that. If b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, what that means is that we have a positive in the square root. Well, we can square root positives, and if we can square root the positive, then we get plus minus some number. That's going to give us two different solutions. So we'll get a graph that's going to cross the x-axis more than once. Okay, it could look like that. It could be upside down and cross more than once, but basically it's going to cross the x-axis more than one time. So essentially, that as we change that b squared minus 4ac, we can see that's going to change the number of solutions. And we can actually mess around with this and play around with how does b actually affect what the graph looks like. How does a affect what the graph looks like? How does c affect what the graph looks like? We kind of know what a does, the vertical expansion compression. C is a vertical shift. We don't really know much about b. So let's just take a look at the graph and mess around with it and see if we can see any types of relationships.